And so if your goal is monetary independence, it feels like a cryptocurrency is the way to go. And we can have the inflationary deflationary debate. Sure. You can create an inflationary cryptocurrency and have it inflate perpetually at 3% and so forth. But what's problematic to me is that the facts and circumstances will change monetary policy radically. And the problem is it's always biased towards the rich and large companies against the poor. And all right, well, let's talk crypto. So where did we all come from? So in the 1980s, after the internet was really starting to get rolling, a lot of people were discussing, well, what does this all mean for the world? And so there was first this concept of, well, if you could move information instantaneously anywhere between people, it's really going to change the information economy. And we're going to move from this building cities around repositories of information like palaces, libraries, universities, and everybody can just live anywhere they want and they can communicate with anybody real time. They even wrote things like the whole Earth catalog and all these other ideas. Well, a subgroup of those cypherpunks who were thinking about, well, what does this move for information? We're also thinking about, well, what does this mean for value? Money, financial transactions, these types of things. And so this group of people started coming up with ideas of how do we create a financial system that is global first, always on, digital, and behaves kind of like how the internet behaves. The problem is that that's super hard in practice because you don't want central authorities to be in power with it. So it started kind of a 30-year quest from the 1980s to about 2009 to figure out how do you do e-money or the electronic movement of value between people who don't know each other without needing a central intermediary. A second generation had to come, and that's really what the Ethereum revolution was about. And that was the idea of the smart contract. And once you had that, you had programmability. It's kind of like when JavaScript came to the web browser, you went from these static websites, which are pretty and they have text and pictures, to interactive websites like Amazon and Facebook and YouTube and Google and so forth. We have a two-way relationship. You can do things with them. Okay, well, once you have programmability, then suddenly you have things like decentralized finance and the DeFi revolution. You have things like NFTs that a lot of people have heard of. You have oracles, you have stable coins, all these other terms that have come out, ICOs, STOs. You have an acronym salad that basically comes through. So then the problem is that, well, that's awesome. It doesn't scale to the needs of millions to billions of users, and it's not really useful for a drop-in replacement for a legacy financial system. So you can't just take Ethereum and you put it into Ethiopia or Kenya or Botswana or Burundi, or put it into a local community like an indigenous population and say, okay, here you go. You can run a whole governance system with it. Because the operating cost is too high. The protocols don't scale like that. So then the next generation came and they really focused on that design space. That's where the Cardanos come from and the Solanas and these other things. And so this industry is now about 13 years in. We've gone from nothing to over 100 million people. At the all-time high, there was over $2 trillion of value. There's still about 1.2 trillion in value. There's hundreds of marketplaces across the world. And it's really starting to touch on everything. It's touching on trade, it's touching on identity management, it's touching on voting, in addition to the financial stuff of just the movement of value. Yeah, a big concern of ours is economic identity and how do you bank the unbanked. It's been a life mission of mine, and for almost 10 years now, I've been chasing it. I did a TED talk on it back in 2014, and hopefully we can do that talk again and say we've moved the chains, we've made some progress. But in general, when you look at the developing world, there's a kind of a convergence of bad forces. First, you have very usurious marketplaces. So you have remittances at 15%, you have lending at 85%, you have a lot of predatory behavior. Second, you have exclusion from the global financial order, meaning that it's very difficult for people, even if they want to get a bank account and get economic identity, build a reputation, become creditworthy, and be respected in a global marketplace. I'm just thinking about the discrimination. If you have a business in Addis Ababa or in Nairobi and you go to Silicon Valley and say, hey, would you like to invest in my startup? No, well, we just don't know how to do business in that jurisdiction. Sorry. So all those global capital markets are basically excluding you. And so you have a really hard time lifting yourself up. It's not a ladder out of the hole. It's more like a pit full of cobras. You have to find a way to build your own ladder off of the cobra bones. We're working with a company called Possessia in that particular instance. And so there are many components to making this work. First, you have to actually get a loan book. You have to onboard people into it. And thus, you also need people that gain some form of identity. So we have another product that we've constructed called Atala Prism. This is the identity product that we use with Fortune 250 companies like Dish or the Ethiopian government. So basically has this thing called a DID, a decentralized identifier. And we give people those credentials. We let them create them. And then you can build reputation, and you can do know your customer and anti-money laundering and all kinds of things on top of that to ensure that they have identity. Now, the power of DIDs is that they're agnostic to the infrastructure, so they can work in legacy systems, they can work on Bitcoin, they can work on Ethereum, they also work on Cardano, the blockchain we're deploying this on. But then once they're deployed, they now have identity, and then you can build reputation. So you can combine more traditional microfinance scoring for creditworthiness, collateralized and uncollateralized on top of that, and then you create a marketplace. And so then it's like a Kiva-like experience. People can actually see specific people, say, oh, that person looks good, and click a button and send them a loan. And then that person will repay over time. Usually these loans are 30 to 90 days in microfinance, and they can pay with a cryptocurrency asset. So usually you like to use a stable coin, so something pegged to the US dollar or to the Canadian dollar or to the euro or some asset that tends to be somewhat inflation resistant. So there's predictability in the repayment terms. But if you're clever about how you structure it, you can have much more agility and much lower onboarding costs than conventional systems. And then you're lending, let's say, a stable coin. Well, on their side, they needed the ability to convert that stable coin into the local currency. Great. Well, you need partners then that are on that side that can do that at a low conversion fee, usually under 1% for that conversion fee. So that's why we chose Kenya as a marketplace to explore and pilot these ideas, because all those pieces of plumbing happen to be there to enable that. But what's really cool about it is once it's running, it's completely decentralized. And then more and more people will do it because they're having a good outcome with it. And there's also a good social component to it. So it creates an abundance of capital that enters that jurisdiction, which means that the interest rates fall. So then you start seeing a normalization of the interest rates in the developing world with the developed world, which is unheard of. You have 85% interest rates in Kenya right now, and for microfinance loans.
Yeah.
And United States and Canada, what is it? 4%, 5%, these types of things for loans. So that's a humongous delta. More capital, more availability, they start normalizing, so they become less predatory in some of those jurisdictions. Look at the last 20 years, the United States. We've gone from $4.5 trillion in national debt to $32 trillion plus of national debt. And now we have inflation that's almost double digits. When they said it was always going to be around 3% with all this inflation targeting. I mean, that's why Ben Bernanke got his job at the central bank. He was the big inflation targeting guy, and he said, we know how to target inflation. We know how to keep it under 3%. There's too much political manipulation in these things and fiscal manipulation in these things. And basically, we live in an age now of massive national debts and perpetual deficits. And the other problem is that what happens when you pay real interest rates on these things? Like if you look at a 3% interest rate on the current US national debt, that is more money in interest that you owe than the entire money we spend on the US military, $1 trillion a year. And that's just 3%. What if it's 5%? What if it's 7%? I mean, that's then more than all the tax receipts than the entire government gets. You can't afford that as a nation state. And then the problem is you're running a deficit, so you have to print more money to be able to pay for this. So you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's the predictable reality when a government is unconstrained and they have unlimited printing authority. And they say, well, we'll just keep the central bank somewhat independent, but you never really can. And if that's your goal, why aren't you going to crypto? Because you get true independence. And so if your goal is monetary independence, it feels like a cryptocurrency is the way to go. And we can have the inflationary deflationary debate, sure. You can create an inflationary cryptocurrency and have it inflate perpetually at 3% and so forth. But what's problematic to me is that the facts and circumstances will change monetary policy radically. And the problem is it's always biased towards the rich and large companies against the poor and creates more inequality. As a final point, keep it simple for people. If you think of The Simpsons, it's a show we've all seen, we all know. There's something very subtle about The Simpsons that most people miss. Homer Simpson is married to Marge. He has 3 kids. He doesn't even have a high school degree, yet somehow he makes enough money to afford a home with 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, and he lives a middle-class lifestyle where his wife doesn't work. So we were in 1989 comfortable with the reality that a family of 5 could live off a single person who's not even college educated wages and live a comfortable middle-class life with 2 cars. Is that the reality most families face? No, both people college educated, they both have jobs, they can barely afford their 2 kids, they're dead up to their eyeballs, and yet they make more on paper by a factor of 5 or 6 than Homer made working at the nuclear power plant. So there's something wrong with the money.